how should I say? This is, okay. We're now in part 5 of this hero's journey adventure with Eric, and we're talking now about the return. So this is somebody who has made the right choices in terms of our characters or even our own spiritual lives. We've reached a point of no return. We've ended up where our characters have made a choice and they've pulled through, and they've now discovered a whole new world. Like they've broken through, what was that quote from earlier? They've broken through the walls of day into the dark where the jewels glow, and they've found these jewels, right? So so walk us through this final part of from this Ignatian standpoint and how it impacts and why it's meaningful to us.
Well, I think this gets to kind of fundamental truth about Christianity, right? Well, Jesus comes back, right? Our dark night is, Jesus dies, Jesus is put in the tomb, but he comes back. And I always think God could have just sent the angels around, announced hey, good news, everybody. But instead, there's this very physical return of Christ into the world, back to his community, to be with again, right? To accompany, to feed, to nourish. I think that's key. Again, we're talking about the spiritual exercises. The fourth week is that kind of celebration of the resurrection. And the idea of celebrating. Just the idea of celebration, I think, is really key in this part of the story, right? It's a communal endeavor. And it continues, like what I was saying before, this idea of union with Christ, first in suffering and then in celebration. How are we allowing ourselves to be stirred to joy by others? Well, that can't happen for any of our characters, right? If they don't go back to the communities and say, hey guys, guess what? Good news. There's so much more out there. It's not a returning to the status quo. It's a returning with this knowledge, the treasure, the sword of truth, whatever it is, and saying now we've all leveled up, right? What I went where you couldn't, but now we all benefit, right? That return to community, that again is essential in our own kind of Christian faith, but but is key in so many. I mean, if you think about your stories, you always think about those kind of like oh, they do kind of always end up back where they started, don't they? Why is that? Why and of course I think Frodo goes on. He can't stay in the Shire. He has to go on eventually to the Grey Havens, right? But there's still that turning back, because there's a need to go back to the community to kind of reverence where you've been, to bring to this formative area what you've learned and acquired. And I think too about just kind of the ending, that story's end, right? And what are you fighting for? What is the story for? I remember as a child often thinking boy, I wonder what it would be like to hear a story where all the Jedi are just having a great time, living their lives. There's not much, as we said before, it's not much of a story, but it is kind of what the hero's journey is for, right? In our own lives, I think about time with my own children, being this is it. This is what what the story is for, what the hero's journey is for these moments of peace and delight. And I think that happens in the return. That happens in that returning to roots.
Yeah, I think I'm always struck by, there's a sense of sadness that these characters have, but it's sadness that's also rooted in their wounds, obviously, their healing wounds, and there's a deep sense of peace, right? I'm thinking of Luke standing in the final celebration as the Death Star is falling to bits around the planet. And then he's looking at the celebration, and they're all dancing. And I think C-3PO is being elevated by the Ewoks and stuff. And I remember him sort of sadly looking on, I think, and smiling. I think this is in the Return of the Jedi. And then he goes off and he stares at the moonlight. And there's a sense of, quote Frodo, how does one pick up the threads of an old life? I can't go back and be everything that I was. But that's not to diss the innocence of those who are still at that earlier part of the journey that I left behind. And now it's on me that I've completed one cycle of this adventure. I am now a much deeper and broader kind of person, capable of taking on so much more of the world and responding to it more effectively. Those kinds of people, I think, routinely take responsibility for the rest of their environments. You look at Sam, and in the books he goes on to become the mayor of Hobbiton. But that kind of person, seasoned with all of that experience and all of that insight and all of that pain, because it's the wound or it's the pain that allows wisdom to actually get in. Otherwise, it just sort of glosses over, look how long Bilbo went, 80 years or something before he went off on his journey. Or, hey, Abraham, 80, 90 years or whatever it was before God finally hit him over the head and says, you need to get out of your father's house and go on an adventure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's well said. I think I think too, what I always kind of think about too is it's easy when you're looking at the scene, from Return of the Jedi, like, oh, like Luke, Leia, Han, Lando, maybe Chewbacca, right? Those were the ones, like, now they're the leaders. But when we're sitting around, like, you're sitting around the fire with some friends or even some like kind of acquaintances, and your hero's journey, I always think like, oh, are we curious about the hero's journey of others, right? Because we're all doing this. We're all main characters in our stories, right? We're all main characters in God's story in some ways, right? And so we all have those, as you're saying, like this kind of a cyclical call to adventure. We're in different moments at different times, and but we all have this opportunity to. But are we giving it to one another? Are we offering each other, hey, like, like I've been to the mountain and back, and I bet you have too, and let's talk about it, and let's it's not just my story, let's build something together. So I think that's where like the fiction, where we have to pinpoint one protagonist or a couple protagonists versus real life, where like we're actually all protagonists, in life, living in communities shared together. Where really, again, you zoom out and you really take a look at the big picture.
Yeah, I think we routinely see it's like a spiral. So it's not helpful to think of everything just as a straight line, because it's not actually how we live in life. We go through cycles. But if you're not developing or leveling up or progressing or something, then yes, it does stay like a flat circle. And that's not actually helpful for human living and progression. What we do need is we need to be making progress, becoming deeper, stronger, more resilient, maybe more aware, more intelligent, and more spiritually, deep, all of this sort of thing. So what then ends up happening is it is like a spiral. So yes, you might end up coming back home, but you're not on the same point anymore. You're kind of at a higher point of your own journey, and you can now encompass everything that came before, but you're also now able to include a lot more. Again, this sort of sadness and nostalgia of Luke or Frodo. I can't totally pick up the threads of a new life. I'm thinking of myself coming back from college after my first year, and that was the end of a first cycle, and I'm now like a different person, but I'm back with my family, and there everything's back as it always was, but I'm now different. I'm now changed, and so I have to now relate to all of this in a different way or a new way, and then that then starts a new part of the cycle.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that's, it goes back to what we were saying before, right? Because that idea of you get to a point of no return, when you're looking at the Dark Knight, like, oh, I have to go on because I know too much. You still know too much at the end of the story, right? When you have your happy ending, you still have, as you say, right? I think very wisely, this nostalgia, this sadness. I think it's very important. And I like how you're, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but almost like you're almost blessing that sadness, because I think we all feel it at times, right? When we come back from big moments. But in fact, that's like a well-earned piece of humanity that we all, it's a hard thing, but we all
It's
get
like
it, and it means we've
mourning
been
the loss
somewhere.
of a childhood. It's like you're mourning the loss of a childhood, but also recognizing now I have to put away the ways of a child and embrace, the path of like next level, which could be being an adult, or it could just be, one more thing. And I think we do that as authors, and sometimes we can discover this through our writing, and field testing our characters, and then just come to an understanding or a realization. And then here's the thing: now we know, and now, the question is, what are we going to do with that? Who are we going to become? How do we model it? How do we witness it? So, any final thoughts as we wrap up part 5?
Just the story keeps going, right? I think sequels get a bad rap sometimes, but like that's life too, right? Like as you said, like the spiral keeps going up, and it's interesting to I think to pray with that idea too. Like, well, okay, not all sequels are bad, because my life is still being lived even after I've had one adventure after the next, big, small, or otherwise. And so how do I really kind of hold on and reverence that part of all of our stories as well?